Coogs House. The Houston Cougars are entering the Big 12 and get to play Oklahoma State towards the end of the season. The season series has been 20 games long. Houston's won the most recent one, but have only played them 5 times since 1970. 5 times.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater can step by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way we can lay us on the Cougs into your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. And welcome back to the YouTube channel. If that's where you found us, it is so good to see you again. Remember, hit that subscribe button, like and comment to let us know you're in the contest. We're giving something away every 250 subscribers. The next giveaway is a hat at 1,500. We're in the 1,400, so hit subscribe and help us get there, like and comment on the video so we get there quicker. Also, we're doing a giveaway at 2,000 if we get there before the TCU game. We're going to give away a replica University of Houston football jersey with the Big 12 logo on it. So, again, hit that subscribe button. If you cannot tell by the green surroundings on the YouTube channel, this is a crossover. So with Locked On Oklahoma State, Cody's going to be on in a second. We did some of these recordings over the summer to kind of get ready for the Big 12 season, to kind of hype up some energy. And I cannot think of a better way to end that series as we start the fall officially next week with some previews and mailbags and things like that for the season. Cody is as energetic and passionate a fan as there is in the Locked On Network. Ton of fun in this episode, and frankly, a ton of fun with Cody. I hope that these things keep going as Houston continues to play Big 12 teams like Oklahoma State. Thank you so much, Cody, for stopping by, and thank you so much for tuning in. Let's jump on in with Cody. I'm joined by Cody Stovall. Cody, how are you doing today?
Man, I'm doing very, very well. I would like to complain, but I learned a while back nobody really listens anyway, so we'll just keep on trucking.
Nobody really. Well, I hope someone's listening. We're talking about entering the Big 12, right? Houston's one of those expansion teams looking forward. Houston has been to the state of Oklahoma to play other schools, but has not gotten to play Oklahoma State a whole lot in recent memory. And so I want to take the chance today to get to know a little bit more about the Pokes and the program and all those kinds of things. So, Cody, as we look at this fall, actually, before we even get to that, what can you tell us about the last couple seasons under Gundy? I mean, we know he's a man, he's over 40 at this point, but what do you know? What can you tell us about the last couple years of Oklahoma State football?
Well, it's been the epitome of a roller coaster ride for sure, right? To end up 6 inches short of a Big 12 title and then to have our worst season in 16, 17 years. It's really hard to swallow those two things, right? But the dichotomy of the situation seems to be resolved now. We did have some issues, right, within the locker room last season. And I don't want to say it became cancerous, but you know firsthand, when a locker room is lost, it's really hard to get it back. And, you know, we had to adjust some things in the offseason, and all of the indications thus far are that we were able to fix a large portion of it. So the locker room issue seems to be resolved. Thank you to some of the senior leaders that stepped up and basically took the onus upon themselves, right? The leaders of last season, by week 4, they were not in a position to lead. So it did cause some friction, and it's just really hard to reel it back in. So we had to do some things. We had to let some people go. We had to bring some transfers in. And thus far, man, it looks really, really, really good. I feel more confident about this offseason than I did the offseason of 2021.
So talk to us things. You mentioned there's a lot of people changing places, people coming in, people going out, but coaching and players. Who are those new faces and names that Houston Cougars can assume they're going to hear a lot of this fall?
Well, right now, the hot name is Brian Nardo. That's our defensive coordinator that we stole from Gannon University. Yes, if you want to get your Google on, you can find it. But, you know, Mike Gundy has kind of been famous for getting guys that nobody's ever heard of, right? We brought in Sean Gleason from Princeton. Before that, we brought in Mike Yursich. And it's by and large, typically worked out for us. Right? People forget that Jim Knowles was kind of a forgotten piece over there at Duke, right? He was a very cerebral-based coach, but in a position where he wasn't going to have a lot of opportunities. Comes to Oklahoma State, had to adjust some things, refine some things, but he was another kind of off-the-wall hire as well, right? And I think the knee-jerk reaction when Brian Nordauer was hired was, oh, great, here we go again, right? Another Shippensburg State University type of guy. And you know what? Gundy does this strategically, right? There's two reasons he does this. One of them, I don't know that we necessarily need to get into, but one of them is longevity. Mike Gundy has been very vocal about he doesn't want to get a coach that's only going to be here for a year or two, right? We just did it with Derek Mason. We proved we can go to the SEC and we can steal coaches and we can pay millions of dollars. We're okay with doing so. But I think we also realize that it's not necessarily the greatest move in the world either when you can get somebody, develop them, and keep them here for 5-6 years.
So the coaching staff and changes, I think, it sounds like a necessary thing. On the field, like, a quarterback is a disproportionately important position. Who's taking the snaps? I noticed there's a kid named Gundy, but I imagine that's just throwing out there, right?
Well, so okay, I'm gonna step into a little bit of a trap here. Yes,
my bad.
And well, a large portion of the fan base is not a big believer in Gundy. They think kind of like that. He's on the roster because his dad is the coach, right? But I've told people this before. At one point in time, TCU had him as like their number 2 overall target, right? So they were very heavily involved in the recruiting process of Gundy. And it was Gunner's decision. He wanted to play for his dad. That was that, right? So when people realized that, the recruiting kind of fell off the board. When you saw him against K-State, right, we were down like 48-0, and he gets to the game and he starts shaking. That's a bad look, but that's also a terrible position for your dad to put you in. Hey, son, I'm going to wait till we're down by 50, and then I'm going to throw you in the game. No pressure, no big deal, right? It was just, it wasn't a good look. And then when he did get his first start, it was against Iowa State, which last year with their iteration of the 3-3-5 that Haycock runs was the best defense in the Big 12, right? They've been one of the better defenses in the Big 12 for years now. So that's something that you're going to have to be prepared for. His iteration of the 3-3-5 is considerably different than your traditional. Like the 3-3-5 was based off of the regular 4-2-5 defense, right? But what Aycock's been able to do with that stand-up defensive end, it's something that we're incorporating as well. It's another change you're going to see from Oklahoma State this season. We've changed the defense that you'll see this year is not the defense you've seen for the last 6-7 years, right? It will be considerably different. And I think it's a smart move. The deepest position we have this year is at safety. So if you got a bunch of safeties in our starting, primary safety, the dude's 6'5", 230 pounds and runs a 4.40. So when you have somebody like that,
pretty big guy.
yeah, like if you have a safety that could legitimately probably play linebacker, you're probably in good shape. And then we have Colin Oliver, right? He was a freshman All-American. Last year, he split reps with somebody who transferred out to OU. But after the Trace Ford, the guy who transferred to OU, after Trace Ford got injured, Colin Oliver got the bulk of the snaps, right? He flourished. And now we move him to this linebacker role. He's cut down 7 pounds. He's cut down a tenth of a second off of his 40. The defense is going to be very, very fun to watch. Are we going to make mistakes? Yes, we are. But we're going to make mistakes at 145 miles an hour, and you'll take that.
All right. Now, I don't know which of these teams wins a championship first, but I will say that if you need a championship team, you got to make sure every player is the perfect fit. It's the same thing when it comes to your vehicle. Every part has to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors, the eBay Guaranteed Fit. You can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to my garage and look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only, and exclusions do apply. Definitely. It's interesting. It feels like, because so I still think of the Big 12 as someone entering it new, as like the 2012 Big 12, where like scores were 65-60, right? Oklahoma State's kind of zigging where the conference would have zagged there, right? And focusing more on the defense. Mm-hmm. You mentioned changing schemes up a little bit. You mentioned big safeties. What are the defensive names do Houston Cougars need to be on the lookout for as this is a defensive-heavy team?
Well, I think Xavier Benson is somebody that we need to watch out for as far as just like, kind of the leader of getting everything squared away. Now, as far as like who's probably going to end up in the NFL, that would definitely be Kendall Daniels, that safety that I just mentioned. And then obviously Colin Oliver, I think he's going to flourish in this Von Miller style of role that we have him at now. Anthony Goodlow, 4-star transfer from Tulsa, is going to be a good one. Lyric Rawls. Lyric Rawls is an up-and-coming safety that is going to be a problem for years to come in the Big 12.
Well, that's a lot of names. That makes me kind of worried about the defense.
Well, and then so I do want to reverse a little bit, right? You brought up quarterback. I went into a little bit of a diatribe about how people underestimate Gundy. Coming into this year, everybody assumed that Alan Bowman, the transfer from Texas Tech and Michigan, would be the guy because he's really good at destroying the Oklahoma State uniform on the other side of the field. And, the thing of it is he's still kind of taking the bulk of snaps, but he's splitting. He's splitting pretty evenly with Garrett Rangel out of Frisco, Texas. Garrett Rangel's like the Mr. Consistent, right? He's not going to do a lot of crazy stuff, but he's not going to mess up a whole lot either. Alan Bowman is a little bit like Spencer Sanders. Now, he's not athletically going to run around anywhere. He buys time in the pocket. But, Spencer will drop dimes that are NFL level and then throw back-to-back picks, right? That's precisely what we have right now at quarterback. So there is still a legitimate competition, much like you have going on at Houston at the moment. And I think the common consensus is it should be Alan Bowman's job because he can do some things that some of the other quarterbacks can't. But, if we're focused on running the ball, which will be the objective this season, we're a power team now, buddy. 100%. We have tight ends. We have fullbacks. We went super old school. And it looks really, really, really good right now. So I'm excited for it. The quarterback, I think we need more of a Trent Dilfer, more of an Alex Smith, right? I don't think we need a Patrick Mahomes. So, I am a little bit partial. I really like the development of Garrett Rangel. I like the fact that he put on 17 pounds in the offseason because last year he was a string bean, right? I'm sure his own parents will tell you that. He needed to put on weight. He needed to learn the offense a little bit better. He needed to get some of his out routes, right? Sometimes you don't need to be zipping lasers. Sometimes you got to put a little bit extra finesse on the ball. So I think Garrett Rangel has matured a lot. But ironically enough, the guy who had the most surprising spring was Gunnar Gundy.
So it sounds like y'all are as indecisive. I would point out that Alan Bowman, he didn't just like line up at Tech and then transfer to Michigan. He actually played significant snaps at both, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, he didn't play a lot at Michigan. I mean, he got buried behind McCarthy and McNamara or whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of get it. But at Tech, yeah, dude, when he was playing, he was phenomenal. He had a broken collarbone, and then he got healed from that, came back, had a punctured lung, healed from that, came back, broke his ankle, and then he went to Michigan. And so we haven't heard from him for a few years.
I have him as high school class of 2018. That would make him fairly old for this game.
Yeah. Well, and the amount of time he's been in the film room learning multiple offensive schemes, it can only benefit him when it comes to a leader on the field. And again, I don't think we need a big flashy quarterback. We don't need a Spencer Sanders this year. We need a game manager. As old as that sounds, it is what it is. That's the position we're in. We're going to lean behind our running backs. This is the first time in over 7 years we've gone too deep at every single offensive line spot. So we're in a different spot this year, and the talk around campus is considerably different than last year. Way different.
Well, and Houston fans remember he was the quarterback at Tech that threw for 600 yards against Houston back in 2018 when he was at Tech. And so in tying those dots together, and like, that name sounds familiar. It's because it is.
He beat us twice and probably threw for almost 700-800 in those games. So we've seen it.
Tech would do that back in the day. What kinds of questions does an Oklahoma State fan have about the University of Houston? Because Houston comes in as the newbie, the new kid on the block in a lot of ways, but other schools in the state of Texas feel like it's a Southwest Conference thing, right? Like Texas and Houston kind of know each other. Baylor and Houston kind of know each other. Right. I don't get that vibe with Oklahoma State. What kind of questions do Oklahoma State folks have about Houston?
I think the biggest thing is going to be not only depth. Actually, you know what? Let me rewind. Your quarterback situation is bothersome to me, which we'll get to in a second. But my biggest concern is last year you had players and coaches fighting on the sidelines. How do you guys? I mean, we had locker room issues, right? You saw Spencer Sanders screaming and cussing in a headset, which you never saw him do. So you could tell on the sidelines, Oklahoma State had issues in the locker room, as did Houston. So we've done a lot to address those issues. My question is, have y'all? Because typically when you have, coaches and players fighting on the sidelines, there's not a lot of discipline or respect in that building.
Yeah, well, I think that's all fair questions. I will say that I think that there was an exodus of players at the transfer portal window. One guy went to Missouri, one guy went to Colorado, guys that can really play. And I wouldn't have known who was on what side of the line in the sand ahead of that. But after that, there was a lot of Twitter fingers back and forth, guys going back and forth, flying with like, oh, you know what side you're on about. And so I wonder, and I wondered aloud actually back when it happened, like, is that the same line in the sand? And we're just now seeing it play out where guys are leaving this, that, and the other thing. Houston changed offensive line coaches and pulling in a guy, I say kid, he's because he's a younger coach, but named Iman Yagavi. He was at Tulane with Tajay Spears in that run game. They had a Tulane, right? And so he's going to be the run game coordinator, and then Dana's going to run the pass game. So I think they did clean house some a little bit. I will say the perpetrator, though, like Joseph Manjack, who's involved in that big shove you're mentioning on the sideline, and shove is probably putting it nicely. He's still on the roster, so what do I know, right? But Dana is a lot of things that are very good, right? I think you can call it play, and we can talk about the offense. Like, he runs a great offense. He's not known as disciplinarian, right? Like you just kind of know that coming in when you pull in Dana Holgorsen. It's like you might have a year of chaos because that's just not what he does very well.
Oh, that's fair. We're very familiar with Dana. We're very, very, very familiar. And, to be honest with you, I do think that the 4.5 number that FanDuel has you have is probably a little low. You know what I mean? If you're a betting person, you should hammer away on Oklahoma State at 6.5 because we haven't won less than 7 games since 2005. And we have the easiest roster in the conference, maybe the most forgiving roster in America. This should be a good year for us. But back to you real quick. What is going on at quarterback, man? I was a pretty big believer of Donovan Smith at Texas Tech. I know that you guys got our best freshman wide receiver there as well. So I know you have some capabilities. I know you have some weapons. But I thought it would be a shoo-in. Donovan Smith would win the job. You'd have a pretty high-flying offense. It'd be good to go. But this Coley kid is pushing Donovan. So that leads me to believe either Coley's better than I thought or Donovan's worse than I thought.
Well, and I think that the truth is Dana has maintained they're going to play 2 guys, and the old saying, if you got 2 guys, you got none or whatever, right? I think what's interesting in looking at it is the advantages they have is Donovan Smith comes in 6'5", 245, started about half the games at Tech last year, and even after he wasn't the starter, he was a goal line package guy because he runs through dudes, right? He runs over people. So he's got playing experience. Where Lucas Coley transferred in the spring of 22. And Coley is an Arkansas transfer. And he came in and had a year behind Clayton Tune, learned the playbook and learned the verbiage and those kinds of things.
Okay.
And so what I can't, because there was no spring game, which is its own set of chaos that always seems to surround Dana Holgorsen, there was no spring game. And so we didn't get to see live bullet type of competition between the guys, right? Now, could we see that something play out more in the fall? By the time they play Oklahoma State, especially at the end of the season, I hope they've made a decision. I would think they eventually transition into one guy getting most of the reps. I will say, and I've said this across everything I've said about Donovan Smith, I cannot imagine a world where you're inside the 10, you don't put him in at quarterback just to make people think about it, right? Even if you choose Coley as the guy, I think Donovan Smith becomes a goal line package type guy at least. And then truthfully, what's funny is I think Coley puts the ball over the middle more accurately, and I think Donovan Smith puts the ball on the outside with more zip on it. I can't say, I think they're just better at different things, and so what they end up using will be interesting. I'm a guy that thinks they have to make a decision though, so I don't know when they make it, but they got to make a decision at some point.
Yeah, dude, that 2 quarterback thing, it's very intriguing. You know what I mean? Like anybody that's ever coached looks at that and they're like, that's cool. If you can make it work, right? It is cool.
Yeah.
But the only places that have made it work are like your Princetons of the world. So it works, but you never get to see it, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I've always been a proponent of somebody, somewhere, sometime will make a 2 quarterback system work on a continuous basis. It's just, it hasn't happened, man. It hasn't happened. So you're right. The age old adage is if you have 2, you have none. I think there will be a coach that eventually breaks that trend, right? So when you do look at Princeton, I think it was 2016, 15-ish, they were running a 3 QB system, right?
And all kinds of trickeration out of
yeah,
it.
but
And
they could all 3 run, they could all 3 throw. So sometimes they'd hand it off to the third quarterback and he would run it right up the 2 hole like a running back. And they do double reverses and pass to one side of the field, other side of the field. They made it work, right? And so you think that it would work at the Division I level, but it never has. And nobody's really, that I've seen, ever put a lot of emphasis into it. So I don't know, man. But you got to think, like, with today's age of college football, I think Texas Tech's a good example. If Donovan Smith would have stayed, you have Donovan Smith, you have Baron Morton, you have Tyler Shuck, right?
Yeah.
You got 2 dudes that can run like the wind and run people over, and then you got another dude that can run pretty decently that's got a cannon for an arm. You could probably make something like that work, but you kind of negate the running back position. So I understand some of the nuance issues with it, but maybe someday, man. Maybe it's Dana. maybe Dana's the one.
Dana's super. I mean, y'all saw him he was there a season or 2 seasons.
Just one. Him and Gundy were so close.
But the deal there, right, is that he is an offensive creative person. Like, for all his faults, and we mentioned the discipline stuff, or he doesn't like talking to folks like you or me in the media, and he doesn't do any of that. I'd imagine that also doesn't work very well with recruiting if you're not good with the media and not being good with like shaking hands and stuff in people's living rooms. But kids want to play for him because they know they'll get open if they just run their route, right? Like he runs Tank Dell, third round draft pick at 5'9", right? Everyone in America knew Houston was throwing him the football, and he had 17 touchdowns last year, right? at some point, you've got to like give credit where credit's due on the creativity he's got on the offensive side of the ball, even if there's other things he doesn't do quite as well. I am interested to see what the running game looks like, though, because of Emmanuel Gavi as the offensive line coach coming in, and he's a run guy. He's a zone one way, counter the other way kind of guy. And we saw what Tulane did to USC. I mean, he does it. He can coach up an offense.
Well, let me ask you this: does my buddy Boogie break into the starting lineup?
So I think Houston's got as good a wide receiver room as most people in the Big 12. Yeah. I do think that his speed is unreal. Like, he is crazy fast.
Dude, his footwork is next level. Dude, that's actually how me and his dad got connected. Is just, I legitimately just sent him a message, right? And I was like, hey, I don't know you don't know me, but I do have to ask, how does your son get his training? Because his footwork and his route running and pushing up on defensive backs is very advanced for his age. Oklahoma State does not play true freshman wide receivers like ever. You know what I mean? Des Bryant didn't play a lot as a true freshman. James Washington didn't play a lot as a true freshman. Justin Blackman didn't play a lot as a true freshman. Neither did Tylan Wallace. So I think that does speak volumes to what Boogie can do. And, we're excited. Well, at least I'm excited to see what he can do. And I will be at that Houston game, my guy.
Well, and was it Wisconsin? He had like an 80-yard touchdown in one game.
Yeah. Yep, and that was the bowl
game. The footwork was all right there at the start of the play, and then it was like the breakaway speed afterwards. I have high hopes for the kid. I will say, like, I think that's a very crowded room, and so we'll see. Yep. I do think that because it's Dana, a lot of guys will play, right? You'll play go routes, boom, go route, and like just cycle through go routes and that kind of stuff on occasion. So I would imagine he gets in the field and gets some catches. I think it's going to be the kind of thing, because there's no, maybe not a Tank Dell kind of guy on the roster. You might see more of a sprinkling of you get 4, you get 4, you get 4, right. You get 4, as opposed to one guy getting 15. But
that's fair. That's very fair. And what's funny? Like, and this is where I have hats off to Boogie, is I do know that when it came down to the end, Colorado was another very, very serious consideration. And He inevitably picked Houston because he thought it would be far more challenging.
I think it's fairly certain too that if you can be a standout wide receiver for Dana, you get a shot in the NFL, right? Like that's just how things go. And so if that's where you want to be, as you know, he's what, like 6'1", 185 is what I got written down here. Like that's an NFL sized guy. If you show up and you can really compete and get some play, like you're an NFL guy. Like that's the way that goes.
I think Houston will be pretty good. My question would be, and it's the same question I'm going to have about Cincinnati, is depth, right? Traditionally, not always, but typically when you play a team that doesn't have the depth, very often you see it tied at halftime, right? Or coming into the third quarter, it's still a 3-point game. And then as the end of the third, beginning of fourth clicks in, usually you do see a little degree of separation. Do you think Houston's depth is going to take very long to get where it needs to get, or do you think that might be the beginning issue in year one?
My stance on Houston, and I imagine every movement, every expansion school feels the same, but my deal on Houston's been more about the depth in the trenches, not even necessarily the starting group, but like you're saying, it's not uncommon in the Power Five to be on your third string left tackle for a series of the four, in the second quarter.
100%.
And those guys get really young and inexperienced really fast for Houston. And that would be my bigger concern. The starting group, I think, is okay.
Yep.
The skill positions, I think. I mean, we know Dana's always had receivers. Yep. Dana's always had, guys that can catch football. And the DBs, you can find a bunch of guys that go 4-4, right? The deal is really those big fit, like Houston doesn't have the 350-pound defensive nose tackle.
We do.
No, I'm noticing more and more Big 12 schools do. No, but Houston doesn't have one of those. They got. I love Dotton Nwankwo, but he's a 310 guy, right? He's not the same guy. Yeah. And frankly, the guy behind him is like 285. Like it's a big drop. And so looking at the roster from a depth perspective in the trenches, I can see the second and third team getting worked a little bit. So like you're saying, like those late second quarter, or even luckily we got a couple of night games at the start of the year, but those Texas September games can be hot. And so what does that look like? That could be troublesome.
I do believe within the next few years that at least two of the newcomers will be vying for, at least pushing for a Big 12 title. Because, again, I do think that the strength of the Big 12 right now and the fact that it's only getting bigger, the perception of the Big 12 is only getting better. You know what I mean? I've always said this before. If you have a bunch of haters, it typically means you're doing something right? Yeah. Because if nobody hates you, that means nobody cares. And the Big 12 has more haters now than ever before. And that's crazy because 2 years ago, the talk was the Big 12 is a dying conference, correct? Yeah. And now the talk is the Big 12's bullying other conferences and trying to ruin the Pac-12, which is so ironic to me. The Big 10 takes your heavy hitters, and then y'all want to blame the Big 12.
Well, yeah. Back in 10 or 11, they were trying to take the Texas, the Oklahomas, they were trying to take them out west. It's just the inverse of the same thing, except like you're saying, we're not even going for SC or UCLA. I will say, of the newcomers, I know Central Florida is in Florida, and Gus Malzahn is their head coach. But Houston enters with a Big 12 experienced coach. Yep. They enter in the heart of a recruiting hotbed. I feel like it might not be 2023, but I feel like Houston could very quickly rise in this thing. You put some of that new TV money, and we were going from $8 million a year to $40 million a year. You put some of the new TV money in some facilities, get some kids on campus to look at them. Suddenly things can really start spinning. I'm confident in the future, even if it's not the immediate future of Houston for sure.
Brother, man, I do absolutely agree. It was kind of like y'all got a few years back. You got Ed Oliver. I'm sure you remember that. And I remember then it's like, well, I mean, I kind of get it. Like if you're local and you can accomplish the same things, why would you go? And it's a numbers game, man. There's only so many roster spots. All right. You can't have 245 guys. So not every 4 or 5-star guy can go to Georgia or Bama. Georgia or Bama's rosters eventually do fill up, even if it's all 5-star guys. Like I get it. But it's the same. It's the same with Texas. It's the same with OU. There's only so many roster spots, and everybody is going to hit on some guys. Like you mentioned, Tank Dell, right?
Oklahoma State, college and all of it.
Oklahoma State's been famous for sending 2-star recruits that had only one Power 5 offer and them being all Big 12ers or potentially NFLers, right? That's kind of how we've made our name. And I will say this, in today's age of recruiting, schools like Houston, like Oklahoma State, like UCF are going to benefit more than ever because we're schools that have always had to recruit kind of, underrated guys and build them up through the program and make them, much better. With everybody taking 15, 16, 18 transfers nowadays, that means schools are only taking 10, 12, 15 high school kids these days. So that means your typical 3-star guys, they're not getting rated anymore. The guys that will traditionally be a good 3-star guy, they're just not getting recruited and looked at and scouted anymore because the scouting departments now have to focus on the transfer market too.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the transfer market for Houston, and it worked out where several of the transfers into U of H were originally from Fort Bend Marshall or they were from the Houston area, and it was like AJ Halsey is going to be, I think, a great defensive back. He went to New Mexico, led all freshman America in tackles as a corner. He's at New Mexico, so he's the only one making any tackles, right? But he's from Fort Bend. He's coming back home, right? Cool. Like that those kinds of guys coming back to Houston after maybe getting recruited elsewhere. You have some of the same kind of stuff too, where you'll have a guy that is a 4-star and goes somewhere bigger than Houston and then doesn't get any time and is like, I need to go somewhere I'm going to get to play, and then also comes back to, you kind of have both ends of that spectrum. Houston's an interesting spot on that kind of stuff too. And then both Houston and Oklahoma State have done the junior college thing in the last decade very, very well. And so I think that gets you ready for it too, right?
Yeah, no, I think we're in a good spot, man.
Definitely. You mentioned, and we'll close here, that you think the 6.5 win total is bogus for Oklahoma State.
Oh yeah.
Talk us through what you foresee for this fall and why you'd hammer the over there at FanDuel.
Because again, whether you love or hate Mike Gundy, the dude hasn't had this bad of a season since 2005, right? And the roster is considerably different from now in 2005. I don't see it. And the biggest thing for me is the change in dynamics. Going to this 3-3-5, utilizing all of the size and speed that we have at safety, as well as going to more of an old school ground attack. Here's the thing. If we can average more than 4.5 yards a carry, right? Every time that has happened at Oklahoma State University, it's been a 10-plus win season. If that happens again, which I very, 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 very much see that happening, I would bet my house that we rush for more than 4.5 yards a carry this season. And we haven't done that in a while. So because of the simplicity, I think that you're going to see a completely different Oklahoma State team. We start the season fairly easily, right? We open the season with Central Arkansas. That's a W. Arizona State, yes, they have talent, but as we've talked about, depth, they had to replace 30, 40 guys, right, with all the coaching shift and all that going on. I understand they had a good transfer class, but I also understand it takes some while to get continuity built into what you're doing, and doing it in week 2, probably not going to happen. South Alabama, they have a legitimate amount of D1 transfers, but again, depth should show out. Kansas State's going to be a problem. I don't see us beating K-State. We play them on a Friday, a little bit of a short week, and they've had our number for a little bit, right? And I don't think that's the one we win, right? Because it's going to be a dogfight, and we're new to this dogfighting scene. They've been dogfighting for years and years and years, right?
Right.
We have some redemption against KU coming to Stillwater. And again, if we're averaging 4.5 yards a carry, I don't think that their explosive offense is going to be on the field enough to hurt us. And then as you go through the season, we avoid Texas. I love bashing on Texas. I love playing Texas because we typically beat the tar out of them. Well, we don't always beat the tar. Well, we beat them. I think we beat them 9 in the last 12 years. So we like playing Texas, okay? But I think they're going to be really good this year, so I'm not mad that we avoid them. I think Texas Tech has probably, in my opinion, second or third best quarterback room in the entire conference. So I expect Tech to make some noise. We avoid them. We have 7 home games, and in the end of the season, we don't play a cold weather game, none. We get to go to Houston, to Florida, and then BYU comes in. So we don't have to go to Ames, Iowa or Morgantown when it's 20 degrees, which has always been a big problem for us.
Yeah, I feel like we're on the same page here because when I look at Houston's, so they got Houston at 4.5, and that to me means you win your 3 non-conference games and then 1 or 2 conference games is the thing they're betting on there. Yep. Their 3 non-conference games are UTSA, Rice, and Sam Houston. Now UTSA is not like some joke. They're a strong program for the size of school that they've got going, but a Power 5 school ought to beat them. Rice and Sam Houston, again, if you're entering the Power 5, you ought to beat them.
Yep.
And then, yes, TCU in September is going to be tough. And you mentioned like Texas looks talented this year. I think that rivalry game will be kind of a unique, like we've been waiting to play you guys for 30 years. You know, what can happen, right? College football is weird like that, but sure, say that one doesn't work out. Houston also gets to play Cincinnati and Central Florida. Those are 2 expansion teams that ought to be in the same kind of like-minded field. Texas Tech is a little bit different last year, and we're a little bit different than last year, but we took Texas Tech to overtime last year. We get them again.
Well, there's two years in a row you should have beat them?
Yeah. So what I'm getting at here is there's a lot of 50-50 games, and you're betting on flipping the coin heads a bunch of times. And I think that there's too many of those that could go our way to go under 4.5. I'm hammering the over on 4.5. And I pay rent. I don't own a house, so I'm not going to quite put my whole rent on. But you got me, right? You got me. That's what I'm thinking on that. I'm thinking I'm hitting the over on all that. Cody, you and I match up in late November. It's our last home game of the season.
Yep.
We'll be talking a lot more in November, probably in August to get ready for Big 12 stuff and all that, I'm sure. But between now and then, you're putting out content every day. Where can people find you and all your Oklahoma State work?
So, you know, I keep it pretty lively on Twitter. It's at All Day O State. My show, obviously, Locked On Oklahoma State. You can find on YouTube all of the podcast, all of that fun jazz. I also do some content where I travel and I help provide some of the media stuff for some 7-on-7 high school events and combines and things of that nature too. All of that stuff will be kind of coming out of the woodworks a little bit more publicly a little later on, but I stay busy. Go check out the show.
That's all we got today. Thank you so much to Cody again for stopping by and talking all things Oklahoma State and Houston Cougars combined. It was a fun time with Cody. Make sure you go give him a listen as your second listen of the day. Also, check out Locked On today for the latest in all of the sports landscape across everything. Thank you all so much. Remember, Locked On Cougs is a proud Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.